I wrote this book to inspire women to hopefully find their happiness and to figure that they don't have to rely on society's script to do that. Everyone, it's not a one size fit all glass slipper. It's unique to each person, and that's what I discovered, and that's the message I'm hoping to share.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Want to know about real happiness and what it's all about? Well, my guest has her take on that concept and much more. Deb Miller is author of Forget the Fairy Tale and Find Your Happiness. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about the book, go to forgetthefairytale.net. You can follow on Facebook, Instagram, and now I just found out TikTok. And Deb, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ira, for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I wrote this book to inspire women to hopefully find their happiness and to figure that they don't have to rely on society's script to do that. Everyone, it's not a one size fit all glass slipper. It's unique to each person, and that's what I discovered, and that's the message I'm hoping to share.
And you use the analogy all the way through the book on each chapter in terms of Snow White, fairy tales, all of that to make your point. But you have a very successful career. You've been a corporate executive, you've been a mother. Those two right there, that's enough. You don't need any more. And now you live in this wonderful forest, as I understand it, which I want to move to as soon as we finish this interview. And but this is a memoir, but at the same time, it's I guess you would say life lessons, ideas, a fact check book to how to do, or a checkpoint. What's the word I'm searching for? Not checkpoint, but checklist. That's it, checklist of things to do on how to approach life. What brought you to write this book in the first place?
My book is a pandemic project. I'm sure you're familiar with the term blizzard babies, right? That 9 months later, there's a lot of babies born. Well,
Right.
I'm finding that 5 years after the pandemic, there's a lot of books coming out, and especially memoir. So I'm in that group. And so after during the pandemic, you're cleaning out the closets. After a certain point, you wonder when this thing's going to end, and then you want to have something more meaningful to mark that time. And I had just become a grandmother, and my own mom had had a stroke a couple years before that she thankfully recovered from. And I had two fantastic grandmothers. And I thought, okay, I'm a grandmother now. Maybe I want to leave my granddaughter and others, grandchildren to come, a little bit more than a box of photos and a bunch of unanswered questions. I wondered about their lives. And so I thought, okay, I'll start writing down family stories. And it was like a 1,000-piece puzzle. And it definitely kept me busy during the duration of the pandemic. So I put them together. And then I recalled when I was working on my dissertation, I have a doctorate, I on the topic of corporate rebranding. And I most of the research I had to do for that was on more like boring companies, AT&T and GM and so forth. But one really stuck with me, and it was how Disney had rebranded the Princess franchise to keep up with society. And I thought, oh, they went from damsels in distress to warrior princesses, and a stop in between with the Bells and the Ariels, who still had a prince in the picture to save the day, all the way to later Merida and Moana and so forth, who really they were the hero of the story. And I thought, that's what I did. And so this what started as a family records, family stories kind of thing, suddenly had a framework, and it was this Disney princess transformation that I was transforming in parallel to that. It was really odd. If readers will find, I do this cultural commentary to kick off each chapter that foreshadows what's going to happen. So that's where I put the Disney princess in. It's only just a small percentage of the whole book. The rest is about my transformation. But one of them talks about Cinderella and losing a shoe, and I actually did lose a shoe in that part of the book. So it really was these odd parallels that were happening between their transformation and my own. And it really wasn't just Disney. As you think about it, after the women's movement, And then the media, TV was catching up. So we went from my mom was June Cleaver, and she, honest to God, vacuumed wearing pearls and wearing a pressed dress, and so like
Wait a minute,
we
wait a
went
minute,
from
wait a minute, Deb, what's wrong with that?
there's nothing wrong with that. It worked perfect for my mom. And that's kind of the, spoiler alert, takeaway from the book is each person, in this case, I'm mainly talking to women, each woman is a princess, as is written in the Little Princess book. And that's the quote that opens the book. So we're all a princess, but we have to find our own path. And that is the ticket. You don't have to follow society script to feel like you're successful. And so I had to figure out I wasn't going to be living the June Cleaver life. That did not work for me. It worked for my mom perfectly. But, and on TV, we went to Mary Tyler Moore, flipping the hat, and Claire Huxtable as a professional woman. And so the media and Disney was mirroring what was happening in real life to women. All of a sudden, they're in the workforce and juggling two careers, or within the family, and yet taking care of the home front. And I do have, thank you for mentioning, I have three terrific kids, so they were with me. When people say, "Tell me about your book," I say, well, imagine if Cinderella realized that Prince Charming isn't going to get her to the happily ever after of her dreams. And so she got her own white horse and straps the kids safely onto the back and figures out how to get there. And that's
What
kind of how it was for me.
What I like about your approach, it's not dogmatic because, as you said, your mother lived a certain life and that was good for her. And in fact, even in today's world, there are women who live that kind of life and that's for them and they enjoy it and they feel fulfilled. Say that three times real fast. They feel fulfilled. So it's really more about choices than it is anything else. It's not an ideological stamp that you have to do it this way versus that way.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, you could even, I say there should be a male form of this message too, because mine is really directed using the princess metaphor, a little bit more at females. But I have a son too, and I don't want him to feel that pressure that he has to check off certain boxes to be that Prince Charming. He just needs to be himself and figure out. And he does have a fabulous partner. They're engaged and going to be married soon, and that's
Great.
great. I'm
Yeah,
all for it.
absolutely.
Whatever path.
I want to indicate, I forgot to, I said Snow White in the beginning and I should have said Cinderella, but both could apply, I think, in your metaphor of the book. The Maybe I'm wrong because she had seven dwarfs,
No,
but
no, when those all came out, or Snow White was the first. She was the
yeah,
woman standing at the wishing well, hoping
right.
a man. I mean, there's a song, "Find Me." I'm waiting for him to find me. That was the approach back then.
You mentioned you had a son, which is great, and you're right that he just needs to be himself and not worry about what society expects of a man. Either way, from the left or right, politically, everybody wants to define what a male is these days. But at any rate, when you look at your memoir and you share it with people, do you get some feedback from your family, your daughters and your son, in terms of what they see reflecting from you and that things that they can use in their own lives? Or are they looking at it more as, hey, this explains mom?
Well, let me first of all, I'll give you my first reaction to that is I have two millennials and then I have one Gen Z. So when I shared with them I was writing this book, they knew from the very beginning because I would touch base with them. Hey, how do you remember that little family story? This is how I remember it. So
Right.
they've been involved from square one. And it's interesting, my oldest daughter, so dutiful oldest child, she's also an English major. And so she was very involved, wanting to see different versions, was offering edits, she's read it multiple times, etc. She recently did a podcast with me, a mother-daughter podcast. So
She
very
didn't,
engaged.
well, she didn't
Uh,
catch a typo, did she?
oh, she caught a few little things. Yes, she did early
Okay.
on. They all got corrected. We followed her lead. And then my son is an attorney, so he's a patent litigator in Manhattan. And he said, I'll wait till it's in writing, which I thought was so classic lawyer, right? So
Oh yeah.
when I first got an ARC, he was one of the first to receive that. And then I'll jump to the Gen Z. So she's a caboose baby. She came a few years later after the first two. That's why she's Gen Z. And she said, I'll wait for the audio version. So that's how she consumes her book. Now, she did weigh in. Of course, any scene that involves them, I sent to them just separately, like a little, paragraph or whatever, couple pages. So they all were clued in on all that, on all the details. They're bottom line, Ira, is they're very supportive. Both of my daughters are in marketing. Hadley's at Google in marketing research, and Allie works for Placer, an AI company, and she's in marketing. And so each of them have supported this book launch. They really got into the book marketing phase of it.
Of
So
course. They're your kids.
Had they posted on LinkedIn and had like 2,500 views almost instantly. And then Allie, my youngest, the Gen Z, said, Mom, we got to get you into TikTok. So we actually did a takeoff of something called, it's been on for about 10 years on TikTok, 73 questions with Vogue. And they go to typically a celebrity home and like Taylor Swift, and they'll tour and they'll be asking her rapid fire questions. So we did a home tour on TikTok, and we didn't do 73, it's like 14 questions, and it's only 1 minute long, but it has like 12,000 views. So I don't know that any of this translates to selling books, but it does get different eyes on it. The best thing for me out of all of it was the connection with my daughters
Mhm.
on this project, and that is just priceless.
You mentioned the marketing side of it. Did they read it and also say, gee, I didn't know this about your life here, or I didn't realize this lesson you learned here?
Yeah, I think probably a little bit, but I mean, I'm an open book and my kids and I have great relationships. And so I don't know that they were too surprised about, I don't think there was anything really revealing, and they are new to them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. When you decided to write the book, and the example of your kids is a good example and pertains to the question, you clearly had a certain demographic in mind, I think, for writing the book, even though it's a memoir, but it's also appealing to other generations, clearly as referencing your children. So
Yes.
how did you work that or massage that so that it can work to reach people that even people who, for example, are retired and may want to get a sense of, hey, I could still do this or I could do that, etc. How did you work that out?
Well, I have a couple reactions to your question, so may have to circle back if I don't answer all of them.
That's fine.
The first thing was a friend of mine, Jill Zarin, was the original cast member, one of them on the Real Housewives of New York City. She wanted to read the book, so she was an ARC reader, and her blurb
We should
was
define, by the way, for our listeners and viewers, ARC is a terminology that has to do with previews that go to various people to read the book ahead of publication.
It's yes, it's an acronym for thank you. It's an acronym for Advanced Reader Copy that they receive. And so she wanted to read that, and her blurb, the endorsement about the book was pure magic, and that's on the cover of the book. But she also wrote in a longer version that every woman should read this book. And when I heard that, right around that same time, I was reading her very kind blurb. I teach at Purdue University, but I also teach at Washington State University, both online. And some of my students at Washington State University, they're actually interns that were assigned to this project. When they read the book, the first thing they did was read it. Each of them, in their own way, came back and what they wrote on Goodreads about it. And they said, every woman should read this book. And I thought, oh my gosh, here are these, women in their from 19 to 22 that are finding life lessons in this book, or role models of women that can have a career and can raise children and can get through a lot of challenges. It was not just an easy path. I had an apple pie childhood, but I've had a lot of challenges to overcome along the way.
Sure.
And they really enjoyed that. So I like it that while I originally thought my audience was baby boomer women who would like all the different musical references and things like that in the book, but I'm finding it's a much wider audience, and that really pleases me.
Yeah, I could see that would be satisfying, especially that you know you're having an impact on people. And even if they only take one lesson from you out of the book, or five or 10, you have an impact on someone, and that has to be deeply satisfying that you can affect someone's life.
It does. And that's actually why I decided to put it out there. Um, who wants, I'm rather a private person normally, but who wants to put out a story of your life? But I thought there was a message there. I kind of boil it down into one sentence. It's actually on the floor banner back behind me, that it says that the journey isn't about finding a prince, it's about finding yourself. And that's what happened for me.
Right.
And that applies to anyone. It's not just women or, the original target. So, and that's what people can hold on to, that and can take that message with them.
And that finding yourself doesn't negate the fact that you may also find a prince.
That's right. Yeah, I'm all for people finding a prince or a princess or whatever, whatever. It's all good. It's got to be I'm starting to have because the professor part of me is looking into the research behind happiness. That's another, I'm very curious. And I actually put together a panel with the University of Washington PhD in psychology who studies happiness. They have a happiness lab there. So she's starting to teach me a lot about the science behind it. And we're pairing with Ronit Plank, who teaches at UW, University of Washington, a memoir class. And then I teach at Washington State University marketing. So the three of us are doing a panel, and we're going to be talking about, the science behind happiness, the storytelling part behind it, and then the self-discovery piece. That's what I bring to it. So I love that mashup. And speaking of mashups, this Saturday at Barnes and Noble here in Issaquah, in the greater Seattle area, I'm having actresses perform a couple of the scenes, because for me, it's kind of ordinary to just have the author read a few things. I really wanted to make it come alive.
Sure.
So that's what we're doing.
So did you take theater arts in school? Is that why you decided to stage it that way?
I No, I didn't, but it started. It actually, I talk about it in the book a little bit. This gets back to the June Cleaver, the Leave It to Beaver thing, probably.
Mhm.
Our moms were judged by how clean your houses were and how successful your husband and kids were. So my mom in the summer, like every other neighborhood kid out there, we were turned loose, and so we spent our summers in tree houses, and now I live in one, literally. So I apparently liked it, and we had secret forts, and we explored creeks and picked blueberries, but we also had plays. And so every summer in our backyard, we would have the big, theater production. So, for example, we did Peter Pan one summer. I was Captain Hook. Now, my kids, I actually had the ability to take them to Broadway. So when they were 8 years old, we would go on a mother-child trip to New York and we call it the Home Alone tour, because we would go to all the various places that were in the movie and check them all off. But one was then seeing a Broadway play. So I've always had that. I'm not an actress, but I love seeing them perform. And so we're actually having a couple actresses that performed in Mamma Mia at their high school production this past spring, and they were rehearsing right in this very room the other day. I just posted about it on Instagram, and it's I can't wait. They are so talented, and I can't wait for. There's so many other authors in the Seattle area. They're rushing in because they want to see how this is done. This could be a new thing, Ira.
Absolutely, rather than just sit there and read from a book, which can be very, even a great book, depending on how it's read, can come across a certain way. I love the idea. You know what? Also, I'll weigh in on the marketing of your book too, since your kids already did that. I think that you should, for every person that buys a book, they get a free tour of your house. What do you think?
Well, actually, they can have a free tour on TikTok because it's already out there.
Okay,
So
fair enough. Or maybe a free lunch then. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll work it.
yesterday was my pub day technically, and I belong to a pub. Craft beer is very popular out here in Seattle. So I had pub day at the pub, and I did buy a beer for anybody who bought a book. So I think you're on to something. I just did it in a slightly different way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I love it. Or make a deal with the pub so you're not out of pocket, but for everyone that comes in and buys two beers, they get a free copy of your book or something.
The hey, the pub owes me. I was on TV Monday morning and was plugging the pub day event while it was
Perfect.
on
Yeah,
there. So
exactly. I think
yeah.
it could work out. So, how long did it take you to write this book? Because clearly you were familiar with the subject matter because it was you. So, therefore, and your memory's pretty good, and you check with your kids to make sure other memories were okay. So, was it written primarily during COVID or was it after COVID
Oh,
when you wrote
it
it?
is a long process. I think memoirs maybe especially long to write. Probably historical fiction is also requires a lot of research, as opposed to just classic novel. You can crank those out maybe faster. I admire the people who do. It probably took maybe 2 years actually to kind of write it because you put it down for a couple months, you just can't look at it anymore. So if you condensed it, you could do it faster.
Sure.
Then it took maybe a year and a half of editing. So working with the editor, and they really help you force you to tighten it up and hone in on key themes and so forth. That was very helpful. And then this last year and a half on the publishing path, when you first hear that, like, yeah, we'll publish your book June 24th, and you're thinking, my gosh, how much time do you need to do a cover and the interior design? But it really does take a long time and all these different steps and making sure there aren't any problems with it, all the interior pages. And I respect the process. And she writes as the publisher. And then, of course, we have Simon and Schuster for distribution. So that's why the book, thank you for mentioning it, it's available everywhere books are sold.
Oh, yeah.
And I even did the audio version, but I chose not to do it myself. I found someone that was kind of my twin voice, and and she did it. So
In a way, you're smart to do it that way. I've talked to many authors who have done the audiobook version, and it's a grueling process.
it is. I
And
heard about that, and I also I have a wonderful dog, and I didn't want to put the dog away or in a kennel for like a week while I did this and sit in a closet and try
yeah.
to do all this sound. You know the implications of all getting the sound right, and then to have to go through and check it all. No, I just didn't want any part of that. So.
Smart move, smart move. When you were putting the memoir together, were there parts of it that you had second thoughts about writing?
Oh yes, the editor pushes you. You really don't want to reveal certain things, intimate things. And, she would push in certain situations saying, well, readers will want to know why. Why did you make that decision? And you're not explaining enough of your why. By the time we got done, I did, apparently, according to her standards. But they really kind of pull out of you things that you maybe don't want to, reveal or share.
And they're coming from an interesting perspective because they see what you've written and it doesn't, because they're on the outside reading it, they say, well, this isn't explained exactly right. So they go back to you and say, you have to explain why you made this decision. So from their point of view, I understand. And from your point of view, I understand it. Clearly, it's difficult to share personal stuff, especially if it doesn't put you in a great light. That's a human reaction.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And actually my editor just posted, she has a Substack thing, and she wanted to plug the book this week as it was being published. And I just love what she wrote. She's because she knows the book almost better than anyone other than the narrator and myself, right? And she said, this book is for any woman who, wants to feel empowered. And then she added, and I'd never heard it talked about in the book in this way, she said it's a love letter to her children. And I thought, oh my gosh, it just gave me chills because, again, it started, as you now know, as this project to kind of salvage some family memories for the future generations. And I think whenever you write from a place of love, it should shine through. And for her to say that really made me happy.
Well, clearly it did shine through for her. So she saw what you were writing and realized what it was as a message. There's more than one message, clearly. If I had to narrow you down, if that's the word, for the three key things you want people to know in terms of life, in terms of happiness, in terms of not being stereotyped into one form of behavior, what would those be? And it may be just be one, it may not be two or three. I'll leave it to you. You're the author.
Okay, well, I would say that the title of the book says it all. So if you can forget the fairy tale, which you could substitute the words in for forget society script instead of fairy tale, you can forget the fairy tale, you can find your happiness. And so I think that's where getting back to how we started, it's going to be different for each person. And I really want to emphasize that you are in charge of finding your own happiness. Don't leave it up to Prince Charming or your partner to have to deliver on your happiness. It is up to you. So forget the script and then control, go create your own happy ending. And I I see you, I celebrate you, women who are ready to rewrite this, and I'm cheering you on.
And also too that you can add the media as something you don't want to necessarily have direct you either. You really have to find, as you say, your own happiness. You can't be relying on, well, we mentioned June Cleaver as an example, but even in today's media landscape, which is overwhelming at this point,
Yes.
with streaming services and digital here and TikTok there and et cetera, you don't want to necessarily rely on what you're seeing or hearing in the media to define what your happiness is. Although there's these pressures that of even coming from that world to make you behave a certain way or act a certain way. You really have, but I guess, and I'll ask you the one last question is how can you how can you get somebody to accept that if they are coming from growing up in a confusing nature? In other words, they're insecure or they're confused about how they should be. This applies to women and men, but how would you get them to follow their own path? Is there one key to that?
Well, there are a lot of studies as I'm starting to look into the academic side of happiness. And even very, very busy people, the key is to find little small moments of joy. It might be petting a dog. It might mean enjoying the sunrise. So it's not, studies will show you it's not the amount of time that you spend on like leisure, after your busy day of working or sleeping or whatever you have to do in between. It's how you spend those small moments that you have control over. And I feel like that's maybe why I've always been a very happy person, but maybe because I stopped and smelled a rose, even in my extremely busy life here and there. And that may account for it.
Well, not only did you stop and smell the roses, you pet the dog too.
Yes, I did, and I still do, and
And
always will.
that's why you have continuous happiness.
Yes. So that, and even depressed people, what they advise, which is an illness obviously that needs treatment,
Right.
but they have to take baby steps to find little moments of joy, write down like 3 things a day that did give you joy. So it's all about finding joy that can lead to that state of happiness overall.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest is Deb Miller, and she's author of Forget the Fairy Tale and Find Your Happiness. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about the book, go to forgetthefairytale.net. You could follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, now TikTok. And Deb, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Ira, for having me. I enjoyed it.
I did too. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.